Our next session for EXL is a panel discussion, and our panel includes three speakers, Mr. Mark McKenzie, Mr. David Kundmueller, and Professor Robert Macmillan. We are so glad that they are here today as part of our panel discussion. The panel is focused on the role of technology in career-focused academic learning. I would like to first introduce Mr. Mark, as he is an accomplished leader with 30 plus years of experience in the technology sector. His career has spanned the globe and included leadership roles at small startup ventures and large companies alike. More recently, Mark has advised investment firms on go-to-market strategies and best practices. Mark's proven leadership, industry knowledge, and track record of success make him the ideal executive to lead Kivuto into the future. Thank you so much, Mark, for being with us today. Our second panelist with Mr. Mark is David Kundmueller. He has been a teacher for 5 years and teaches career technical education classes. Before becoming a teacher, he was an engineer that graduated from one of the best universities for engineering. After graduating college, he went to work on Halliburton in Texas and decided his passion lies in teaching engineering technology. He first started teaching in Texas as an animation engineering teacher. He served in this position for 2 years and joined a high school in Maryland. Our third panelist with Mr. Mark and Mr. David is Professor Robert Macmillan. He is a networking consultant with over 50 technical certifications. He has an MBA and teaches Windows Server Administration at Portland-based colleges. Robert has earned his MCSE and MCT from Microsoft and is the past president and founder of Alltech One, which was a Portland-based networking consulting company sold in 2017. Robert has over 20 years of experience in network engineering and earned certifications from companies like Microsoft, Checkpoint, IBM, and Cisco. As a reminder to all our attendees, this conference is being recorded. We will have Q&A at the end of this panel discussion. Please use the Q&A tool if you have a question for the speaker. Over to you, Kevin, David, and Robert. You all can unmute yourselves. I am looking forward to your insights. Ms. Judy Zhang will be moderating this panel. Over to you, Judy. Thank you.
Thanks, Sana. David, Mark, and Robert, it's a privilege to speak with all of you for the next hour. Our theme for this panel is the role of technology in career-focused academic learning. And I think all three of you are just going to be able to provide some really wonderful insight into this topic. So like Sana said, if I see any questions from the audience, I'll try to slot them in. Otherwise, let's go ahead and get started. So let's start off with kind of a background question. So I'd like each of you to describe how your career unfolded and how you got into academia. David, maybe you could start.
So I got into academia as a person who I thought engineering was going to be the route, and then as everyone knows, life comes your way, and so I decided that teaching technology and engineering to high schoolers something that I really like, and so with that, I've been teaching for 4 years and been trying to make sure and improve the curriculums and making sure the technology is up to date, because as everyone knows, technology is ever changing. So
wonderful, thank you, David. How about you, Robert? How did your career unfold?
Well, I started as an IT consultant. I started an IT consultant company in 2001. And over the years, I noticed that my staff kept coming to me to help with various different projects. I believed them to be lacking some key training from their college experiences, so I decided to train them myself. So every Friday we would shut down for a few hours, and I taught them the technical things that they were missing. I eventually sold the company in 2017 because I believed I would gain more satisfaction by teaching full-time.
Great, thanks, Robert. And Robert, you're currently teaching at a college, right?
Yes, that's correct. Teaching Windows Server courses, Active Directory, security, networking, things like that.
Okay, wonderful. And Mark, how about you? How did you kind of enter your career that's academia adjacent?
Yeah, I mean, I'm relatively recent to the world of academia. I've always been involved in and around the technology world. My whole career actually has been involved either providing consulting services for technology implementation or technology strategy, and then um, I grew up in Singapore and I moved back to the UK for school, and then I moved to the US for work, and I ended up in the Bay Area in the 90s and got sucked up into the whole dot-com madness and did my first startup and got caught by the bug, and I ended up doing a bunch of VC-backed software startups back to back in a lot of different areas, a lot of different spaces. But fast forward, eventually my last company was sold to Cisco, and I ended up in the private equity world. Private equity world, a specific model, which is called the search fund model of private equity. Got involved in a lot of companies post-transaction, and one of those companies was Kivuto. I ended up joining the board of Kivuto in March of 2019 and became the CEO of Kivuto in October of 2020. And Kivuto is a platform that's used globally for the management and distribution of digital resources used in academia. That could be software resources, could be digital textbooks, could be OER resources, any manner of resources. We're kind of a two-sided marketplace. On one side, we have digital asset creators, digital content providers, and we plug them into schools, both traditional schools and future schools, based on the agreements they have with those vendors. And we manage and facilitate the distribution of those digital assets into academia. So we work with, I think it's by last count, something like 29,000 schools across 180 countries of the world, literally serving millions of students. So, for me, it's been a real baptism of fire the last few years, really having to wrap my head around all the different nuances. And the one thing that's really struck me has been, in fact, not only the pervasiveness and the strength of technology in academia, but certainly in recent years with the lockdown that we went through, the real acceleration that's happening now. And it's not a matter of, if or having a choice. I think schools really have no choice but to embrace technology and really try to get ahead of the curve, because there's just a proliferation of technology out there that's really transforming education.
Thank you, Mark. So actually, Mark, you've already started answering my next question, which is, how has the pandemic and recent events affected you, your work, your organization? How have you seen schools and organizations that support schools adjust and change over the years? So Mark, do you have anything to add before?
Yeah, I mean, maybe I'll just roll on, and then I'll let the other guys chime in, because I'm sure they've actually seen it at the coalface. The reality is, during that time period, a lot of schools shut down, and traditional ways that students were learning, where they would come on campus, they'd sit in classrooms, they'd have access to labs, they'd have access to libraries, all those facilities went away basically overnight. So schools had to enable distance learning, and really there was only one way to do that, and that was through digital academic resources, right? Whether that's the LMS, the school information system, but they're doing it off campus and they're doing it with their own devices. So really the way it's affected it is it's shown schools where they were lacking, and really been forcing them to accelerate their adoption of technologies, because I think they all recognize now they cannot get caught out like they did in this last pandemic. I mean, nobody could have predicted what was going to happen, right? None of us could have expected the world was going to lock down that way. But at the end of the day, we had to deal with it, and schools had to deal with it. And they're one of the industries that got the most affected by what happened. And so, often innovation or forced innovation happens, and we end up coming out the other side better off because of it. And I think that's what we're seeing in schools.
Great. Thank you, Mark. Robert, how about you? What have you noticed?
Well, at first we saw our enrollment numbers drop, but now, of course, we're starting to see people return. My educational publishing business saw tremendous growth during this period due to many, people learning remotely. But we have a real problem, and that is that during the last big recession, there were a lot less children being born. It was just too expensive to have more kids, and so we actually saw a drop. And now we've seen another drop, due due to the pandemic. So what this means is that around 2028, somewhere in that time period, and going on for probably a couple of decades, we're not going to see growth in colleges and universities because there's not going to be any more kids that will be going into those. So we're going to see a lot of private colleges and universities. They're going to probably go out of business. We've already had a couple that happened near my area in Portland, Oregon. And we're going to see that trend continue. I think that state schools, I think they're going to be fine. Obviously, we're going to have smaller classes in high schools and junior high schools, things like that. But we're going to have a real issue. And I think what's starting to happen is because of those lack of students, we're seeing that a focus on getting better trained. So you're taking people who are already in the system or maybe have already graduated and say, hey, come back and learn something new, get more certifications, get more degrees, things like that. That's really going to be the only way that some of these institutions are going to be able to survive.
That's a good point. And I'm glad you brought up some of the demographic shifts that will likely be heading our way too, because I think a lot of the times people don't remember that. David, how about you? How has the pandemic affected your work?
So, okay, so sorry about that. It has affected my work. As Mark said, the pandemic has really shown what the schools are lacking. Some of the institutions are lacking. With that comes with as in high school level, I have realized that the speed of the technology is increasing, which is good. But the students learning the technology is not. So there's, in my opinion, there's a disconnect that I see is that basic things that I would assume students know that they don't know. And so there is a little disconnect. Yes, it's very rapidly changing technology-wise, which is good. Be more efficient so we can better serve academia and all the students that we serve. But there's a disconnect with all the new technology and that the students are struggling with keeping up with it as well. They are very well off learning it very fast, but they're just not getting the basics, is from my perspective. And the pandemic has just, as Mark said, increased the school's ability to reach people, but also has increased a lot of different other headaches.
Judy, I have a follow-up for Robert and David.
Sure.
We've seen the same thing that Robert mentioned in terms of the reduction in numbers, enrollments. My question for Robert and David is, to what degree do you see some of the newer schools, like the self-learning platforms, the massive online open communities? So, we know the ones, Khan Academy, Byju, Skillshare, Lynda. There's literally dozens out there. If you look at the STEM subjects, there's even more, right? Udemy, Codecademy, there's loads of them. And so my question is, one, to what degree do you think that's contributed to the lower enrollments in traditional schools? And the second part of the question is, how do you see it going forward? Like, do you see the future of education being some combination of the traditional schools and future schools, or would the future schools ultimately replace traditional schools? What do you guys think is going to happen?
Well, I actually create content for, what used to be lynda.com, which is now LinkedIn Learning, as well as Pluralsight and some others as well. And that's what when I was mentioning that I saw growth in that business, that's what the area that I saw was a growth. So for instance, I have enough courses lined up to last through the rest of the year that I still need to create. So what I've noticed, though, is that a lot of corporations, as well as colleges and universities, they're using that content to supplement what their using in their classroom. So I don't necessarily see it as a replacement for colleges and universities. I do see that they are using them. I also like to see that the corporate environment is using those courses because they feel that there is a gap, in their learning, for when they do join the corporate environment. And also you have to have continuing education, those CE credits. So in my personal opinion, and again, I don't have anything to back this up, but I see it as something that, added to, rather than taking away. But, because I don't have any justification, for that at this time, it's just a feeling that I have.
And
Thanks,
I would also, I would back up Robert on that, in a sense that I have used in my academia some of those courses actually to help supplement. So a student is falling behind. I've had the ability to give them that resource for them to catch back up, and then also as well as incorporate little bits and pieces of that into the actual course. So that has really helped the students get out of it, as Robert said, and then reach that divide that everyone seems like everyone's missing with the newer technology. So,
Thanks, David. I'm wondering, I really like where you're going with this, Mark, and I hope we can dig into this just a little bit more. So, what do you all see as maybe some of the benefits, and maybe some of the negatives of using, online platforms, courses that might have been created by certain authors like Robert, and then distributed on these online channels, which then might be used by different schools and universities? What do you guys see as the maybe pros and cons of this? Robert, would you like to start with that?
Sure. Well, I think the pros are, just what we've been, discussing here, and that is that it can supplement, the educational experience, especially for those students who may be struggling. The cons might be that in some cases, some professors or some instructors may decide to use that instead of teaching them themselves, which I hope that isn't happening, but I could definitely see that might be an easy way out to do that kind of thing. I definitely think that it has helped a lot of people. It's helped people get to the industry certifications that they want. We're seeing a lot of college courses that instead of just offering a degree in the area of technology, they're also offering preparation to get industry certifications. So when they come out of that degree, they have these certifications to go with them. And I think that these types of, I've created a lot of courses that, go towards those certifications, and that helps those students gain those.
Yeah, well, I think if it can help a new graduate get a job right out of school, that's definitely a major benefit.
Yeah.
David, Mark, would you like to add anything to that before we move on to the next question?
Well, I would add, it's definitely an interesting question. I've kind of have mixed feelings. Maybe my first point I would make is, when you already have a concept like a digital textbook, the mere fact that a digital textbook already exists, you have to think sort of forward into the future and think, well, 5 years from now, will anyone even use a physical textbook anymore? Right. And I use that as an example because if I then sort of play that out inside a school or university, well, if I have a digital textbook, does the concept of a library versus a bookstore even make any sense anymore? Because surely once I have a digital textbook, the only difference between borrowing from a library and buying from a bookstore is simply the length of time you have the book for, right? I can borrow a book for a day, a week, a month. If I borrow it forever, then it's a perpetual license to that book and I've basically purchased it. So really the distinction between a library and a bookstore makes no sense anymore. We don't have to chop trees down anymore to make physical books. And maybe it's, very similar to what happened in the music industry and movies and TV that, yeah, there'll always be a cottage industry for physical books, but basically no one will read physical books anymore. So maybe the question is not necessarily, what are the pros and cons? The reality is the train's left the station and there's no going back. right? I think 5 years from now, academic experience will be dominated by technology. And how we consume the curriculum and how we consume the resources will all be technology driven. The question is, and I think, both David and Robert were sort of alluding to this in their previous answers, like, how do you maintain a quality educational experience when it's all being plugged in through technology? A few months ago, someone sent me a link of a company in Canada that had raised a god-awful amount of money, I think something like $120 million on a post-money valuation of $2 billion, that was literally tutoring people via text messages. And so, and as a concept, that was obviously the market was liking that. But what's that educational experience like, right? Where is the David Kundmuellers in that equation, right? Where does David's personality and his teaching philosophy and or the Robert McMillan's teaching philosophy and experience, because both of them as teachers, I'm sure, know that the big part of the academic experience is their particular style and nuances and gravitas and how they teach. And so that gets lost, right, in the sterile world of technology. So I'm a technologist, I'm a big fan of that, but I'm also a big advocate of keeping the human side of it in. So I honestly have mixed feelings about the question.
That's a good answer, Mark. And I think I like that you zeroed in on how this is not a good, bad kind of question. This is we can't help it. It's already here. How do we make the most of it kind of a situation?
Yeah.
And, something that you said almost makes me wonder, how should we define academic learning? If the types of content and the resources that we're using at, say, a university is the same that someone could use, maybe in a more limited scope, at home by themselves, what makes academic learning different from non-academic learning or training? I think, I won't open it up too much. I know many people would say, well, it's a type of student. It's someone who enrolls in a more traditional course style. They either get a degree or they get certain course credits. Maybe they're on the younger side if they're a traditional student, or they go back to school if they're an older student. But I'm wondering if any of you would like to address what else do you feel is a hallmark of academic learning, and what are sort of the needs that are different in academic students? Maybe David, we could start with you.
Yes. So can you repeat the question just to make sure I'm answering the correct question? Because there's a lot in there that
there's a lot of
talk about. So.
Sure. So what makes an academic student different? What are their unique needs or challenges versus a non-academic student?
I think so I think at least in I can speak for America because I've been traveling all over the world, and in academia, in my opinion, the student's mindset is that the teacher will teach you and that they don't need to do much. But there is I guess, a disconnect because, as you said, what makes it different than somebody in the corporate world just learning? That's not the same thing. So really and truly, I think the needs for the academia student is that they are using a person's knowledge and their wisdom to better understand the subject at the matter. While the other way around, in corporate environment, it is mainly what's the word I'm looking for?
Self-driven?
Yeah, self-driven. Yeah, that's the word I'm looking for. So self-driven, and I think that as people grow older, they are more self-driven just because of things that are going on in their lives. So I think that is the main difference, in my opinion, if that makes
That's certainly an interesting response, and I think there's probably no wrong answer here. Robert, Mark, would either of you like to add to that? In your experience, how have academic students differed from other types of students, other types of learners, and what are maybe some of their unique challenges?
Yeah, if I could chime in, having taught college now for about 10 years, I'd like to talk about some of the physical issues that can come up. And that is that, if you're learning from home, you probably already have a job, or maybe you're living with family and you don't have certain difficulties as far as dealing with life. However, when you're a full-time student and you can't really work all that much, maybe you're working part-time or not at all, then you've got other issues. You've got issues of hunger and homelessness and things like an average of 2 students in every one of my classes are living in their car. They're homeless. And so they have challenges that, people who have jobs and people who have families taking care of them just don't have. So the ability to learn in an academic environment is so much more difficult, for students that are having, financial issues, which a lot of them are. I think there's not just the homeless issue, but also the hunger issue as well. So it's much more difficult for a pretty significant percentage of students to be able to keep up with some of the learning that they need in order to get their degree and prepare themselves, for their careers when they're having these kinds of issues.
Robert, those are definitely really serious challenges. I'm glad that you brought those up. That really expands our discussion too. It's not just a question of, is this curriculum better or is that curriculum better? It's what's the whole student story? What else do they have to face before they even arrive in the classroom? Okay. So I'm going to switch tack just a little bit and maybe zero in a little bit more on course materials, curricula, and what is going on within the classroom. So Mark, I want to shift over to talking a little bit more deeply about digital assets.
Sure.
So some in our audience may not have a good idea of what digital assets are and how they relate to classroom materials and resources. So I was wondering if you could go into that a little bit, especially if our audience members weren't able to make your session yesterday, to talk about digital assets and how course materials affect a student's learning.
Yeah, I mean, there are probably half a dozen or so sort of commonly accepted, known digital resource types that are now used in curriculum, right? So the first and obvious one is the textbook, right? The digital textbook. Digital textbook is actually a beautiful thing. Like when you take a physical book and you convert it into digital form, there's just amazing things that you can do in the digital form that you simply can't do with a physical book, right? It can, when you render it you stream it to the reader, the ability to share amongst study groups and to be able to embed pop quizzes and other rich media sources. And, if you're borrowing a book from a digital library, you can annotate that book like crazy, and then the next person that borrows that license obviously doesn't see your annotations as opposed to a physical book. But the next time you borrow it, I can reinstate those annotations onto them. But there's just amazing things you can do with a digital book that are just not possible. So that's really probably the primary first digital resource type. The second one is software. There is more and more software now being used in the academic curriculum. At last count, at Kivuto, I think we had counted over 900 different academic software titles that were being commonly used, from known brands like the SPSs of the Minitabs, eViews of the world, all the way down to open source products that are used in the academic curriculum. I mean, it's just an explosion, and it keeps growing rapidly. You then have all the other types of course materials, right? We have OER resources. For those that aren't familiar with those are sort of funded, school professors, teachers, curriculum can develop. They get funding to develop a resource that they then have to make freely publicly available to people. And there are literally millions of those out there, and some of them are really good and can be very useful in the academic curriculum. A lot of vendors are developing learning platforms, right? So learning platforms that have a combination of digital resources that a student will get access to a resource code that then enables them to log in and get access to that learning platform. And there are many of those learning platforms out there now. And then there's all the rich media content, right? There's video, there's podcasts, the list goes on. So those are the digital resource types that are being used in the academic curriculum. And there's an explosion because anyone can be a digital asset creator, right? It used to be you've just got your traditional sources, which is book publishers, maybe ISVs, but now literally anyone could create content that could be useful in the academic curriculum. And as long as there's the right kind of platforms and channels to feed that into the educational system, there'll be a market. So I think what we're going to see is an explosion of both quality content, but also there'll be a lot of rubbish as well developed by definition. You're on mute, Judy.
Sorry about that. Thanks, Mark, for catching that. So with all of these types of resources that Mark just mentioned, I want to go back to you, Robert, and ask, as a college professor focusing on Microsoft technologies, what's your approach to technology learning? How do you design a curriculum? What do you keep in mind as you're trying to figure out how to deliver what it is that these students came to learn?
Sure, and Mark did a great job on discussing digital assets. I think he left out one, though, is a little company called Extreme Labs that is a great digital asset that I actually use in my classroom. So I would like my students to be well prepared for the workforce and go into their new careers with enough learning that they are going to be confident that they made the right decision to work in technology. And that means that they're going to need to learn software and operating systems that are currently in use rather than yesterday's technology. I also want them to be able to negotiate a salary, prepare a proper resume, and understand tech culture so they have a better chance of fitting into their new environment. One of the reasons I see a lot of sysadmins, IT administrators, and people in technology that are getting let go from their positions is because they just don't fit into their environment. And so what they need are instructors and professors who have come from industry and who can explain what that environment is like. So it's not just teaching, in my case, Microsoft technologies. It's also explaining what's going to happen their first day of work. That's a very stressful thing. You think about you're not going to get any sleep the night before. You're not going to be able to eat. You're going to go in. You're going to be super nervous. I can explain what that's going to be like, both from an employee and an employer perspective. And that list just goes on throughout the various different aspects of a career. And so that's really what I want to do. And it's another thing that separates the academic learning from the home learner, from the person who gets it either through a synchronous class like we teach online or from coming into the class and teaching on campus.
I love that answer, Robert. I think you really hit it on the head, the nail on the head there. And kind of answered again that previous question about what makes an academic learner different. You mentioned that it's someone who might just be taking a course online would expect a very technical approach to their learning material. An instructor who might teach just a training course for a week or so is there just to cover the material, and maybe that's it. Whereas it sounds like you do a wonderful job helping to prepare your students for all the little extra environmental things that kind of go around that learning experience. I really appreciate that answer.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah. So let me just step back a little bit further back. So Robert is our college professor here, and David, you teach high school. So, what is your approach to technology learning as a high school teacher? What do you want your students to understand, be able to do? How do you approach your curriculum?
As Robert says, I'm almost kind of in line with Robert. One of my mentors, he always says, we have these meetings with corporate people, and we have these meetings with companies that are local, and they always, I need a kid with soft skills. I need a student with soft skills. And the soft skills of, how do you write an email? Like Robert said, how do you show up on the first day of school, first day of work? How do you do that stuff? And I think Robert really well about that's the difference between academia and the online, is that as a teacher, you get the real world experience. And one of the things that I try to get my students to realize as they're a little bit younger than college, and they're still have to hold their hands a little bit more, is the fact that at the very beginning, I kind of really rigid, and really have them think for themselves. And once they can think for themselves and then find drive, or that self drive, then I kind of back up and it's more of a facilitator, so that they can do which they want to go. So with that, then once we get into, as I'm a facilitator, then I go into soft skills, making sure that they know make a resume, all the things that I think that are lacking in academia, because there's not a course anymore that says, oh, you need to do this for your job, stuff like that. The other thing that I try to make sure I do enough of is projects, getting that experience, hands-on experience, which Extreme Labs does a wonderful job with the Microsoft exam, studying for those, and those labs really help to make sure that the students not just understand the material, rather than they understand it because they have used it. The students nowadays in high school, if they are not doing anything, if they are not physically doing anything, they're not going to learn it. I've had trouble with the set of theory questions, just because they're just not interested. And if they're just not interested, in my opinion, they're just not going to learn in high school, but it's a little bit different in college. So.
Thanks for that, David. I just want to say a quick aside. I'm not prompting our panelists to mention Extreme Labs, my company. They just happen to have brought it up themselves, so I appreciate that. But David, I want to thank you for your answer about mentioning soft skills. As I think especially in the technology world, we imagine technologists to be somewhat binary. You know, they code, they work on a network issue, they go home, they're robotic, you know, but that's certainly not the case, especially in the learning world, where we're developing younger, maybe humans, and helping them learn all of these, you know, sort of different things that they need to know about. I want to link your answer, David, back to Robert's, where you talked about how do we get them used to the environment of being a technologist? You know, if they're going to be a systems engineer, what is being a systems engineer like, besides the very rote technical skills needed to perform task A or task B? I think this is a really important point for audience members too, that it's important to join a community, whether that's online or a local chapter of the group. It's important to be part of a group of people who are all interested in the same thing that you're interested in, so that, you know, you have those opportunities to network and so on. Just moving back towards you, Mark. So as a, you know, kind of thinking about what Robert and David have mentioned about how they piece together the student experience, as a digital asset company that provides materials to schools, how do you choose, you know, which digital assets to offer to your ecosystem? You know, how do you go about partnering with schools to make sure that the materials that you're offering make sense for the curricula?
Yeah, I mean, it's sort of a chicken and an egg question, but the reality is that over time, you know, Kivuto's been in the academic industry for 25 years. And so we've been working with, you know, on one side of our marketplace, the digital asset creators, and on the other side, the schools consuming. And over time, what we've done is we've built just an incredible catalog of digital content. And we actually try to kind of take a neutral stance, because we're the platform in the middle. Take statistics software, for example. We offer IBM SPSS, but we also offer Minitab, right? And we don't try to distinguish between the two. We let it rely more upon the academic curriculum and what that academic curriculum demands. You know, if someone's teaching a statistics course and that professor has basically woven the nuances of the SPSS product into their curriculum, then it's going to be SPSS, and most likely that school will have a campus agreement for SPSS. So we have to just make sure that's something we can facilitate. But it could be Minitab, right? It could be a competitive product, and we try not to prefer one over the other because we try and be nice to everyone, right? In the platform. But one thing I did want to touch upon, I'm finding it actually fascinating listening to Robert and David about the learning experience, and how do we make sure that learning experience, as you're embracing technology, is a quality experience, and you're able to weave in the necessary mechanics of teaching through technology that enables the right kind of learning, and that I think David said it well, like how are you going to make sure that students learning in the academic setting versus the non-academic setting. And so one of the things I learned a long time ago is I did a course where I learned about the biological roots of human understanding and how we seed knowledge in the human brain. And there's a process behind that basically allows us to have the ontological formation of structures in our brain as engrams are getting laid down from teaching moments. But one thing is absolutely critical in that process, and that is you have three things happening. One is you have recurrence, that the moment is happening multiple times. The second is that you have recursion, that the concepts build upon themselves. And the third is that you have reciprocation, right? That is that individual is able to feed back and kind of play back what they've learned. And so ontology doesn't form overnight. It requires all three of those, and it requires all three of those over time, over a horizon of time. So, I think what technology is enabling us to do is to get better at doing that, right? So it's enable us to, if you ever wondered, like, why is social media so successful, right? Why did it sort of pop up overnight and suddenly billions of humans all over the planet are adopting it and using it? It's because whether implicitly or explicitly, those technology companies know that they have the perfect delivery mechanism for seeding knowledge in humans and getting people essentially addicted to using those things, right? There's recurrence, there's recursion, and then there's reciprocation through mechanisms like liking in those platforms. So technology has the ability to do that. And so, but again, I think it has to be used responsibly. It has to be used appropriately. And if we do that, I think we can really enhance the academic experience through both the tooling, through the ed tech tooling, but also the access, real-time access and timely access to the right digital content in the right moment. Data shows that if you deliver learning materials at the right moment, at the point of learning, in that recurrence, recursion, and reciprocal moment, if you deliver it at the right moment, the students' grades can be 15, 20% higher than if you don't, right? If they're late, then it actually is the opposite effect. It'll reduce that student's grade possibility by 15 to 20%. So that's almost a 40-point swing possible just by making sure we're getting the student the right materials, the right content at the right moment, so that process of seeding knowledge in that human brain can happen in the most effective way.
I love that, Mark. I actually really want to follow you there on a bit of a tangent. So we're starting to talk about instructional design, right? You mentioned using some of these human behavioral, what helps using human behavioral principles to help figure out what to make something engaging, easy to follow, and ultimately impactful. And you mentioned recurrence, recursion, and reciprocation. I like that a lot. I've also heard of the term scaffolding, where you lay a foundation. Once you know that your student has that foundation, then you can build on that with more advanced topics that sort of lead from that. Yeah. And going back to kind of digital learning, digital technology tools, that reminds me of how with digital technology, it's much easier to scaffold or to allow for recursion and reciprocation, because it's easier to make individual learning journeys. If we're using, say, a physical textbook, it's hard to customize that to what a student knows and what they should be learning next. I was wondering if maybe you could talk a little bit more about that, customized learning journeys.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely would love to hear Robert and David on it as well. But yeah, I mean, it's amazing. In our platform, we have a digital text platform. It consists of, in the core cloud solution, that's where the digital rights management happens, which is critical for a digital text streaming solution. You have to hold the book in the cloud, and then once a student has accessed the book or subscribed to the book, you then stream it, right? I can't just give that digital book to the student because they'll share it with 200 of their best friends, right? It's very easy to share a digital binary large object. So I stream that book to a reader, and that reader is going to be purpose built for academia. And in our case, it's our e-reader. Think of it like Amazon Kindle on steroids, right? So what you've done is inside of that reader, you've built all these really cool capabilities that will enable you to enhance the student's journey and experience. And every student then can go on a customized journey. So you've got the LMS, the curriculum firing off saying, go get this content, and the e-reader's popping up every time and maybe directing that student to very specific places in the book, depending on where they are on the journey. They can see specific notes that the professors can embed or even direct to certain groups of students that could be at more advanced stage of learning versus lower. So you can now have different pace of learning within a single class set. You can have students collaborating with each other through the technology and popping in notes and forming real-time study groups in a moment, even around just a simple concept. It could be you're studying, Shakespeare's Macbeth, and there's one particular soliloquy that you're trying to digest. Well, maybe you have a pop-up study group that just appears in the digital reader in that moment that's addressing, tomorrow and tomorrow and tomorrow creeps in this petty pace from day to day and suddenly that group forms. They get what they want out of the moment, and then it disappears. I mean, you want to talk about an individual study experience. You can't do that with a physical book, right? All that all has to be organized. Well, that can all happen in real time in the technology experience.
That's great. I wasn't expecting to hear some Shakespeare today, but thank you, Nark. Robert, I know that we've collaborated on books before, and I think something that I've really admired about what you do as a content author is you're great about actually writing content so that does allow for individual learning journey, write in a very modular kind of form so that learners can kind of come and pick up the pieces that they need and maybe not spend as much time on the pieces that they already know. So I'm wondering if you could talk more about that and your experience as a content author and kind of how you allow for individual learning journeys.
Sure, that's a great example on that. And as you and Mark were saying, physical books you really can't change. I mean, you can email the publisher, and maybe a few months later they might make a sentence change. But I've also noticed that even with ebooks, it is kind of difficult to get certain publishers to make those changes there as well. When our students would purchase or they could even rent a book for a term, you can't really get a lot of changes done. But I've been working with a company called Ascend Education, which is like in combination with Extreme Labs, where the ebook portion, is coming from Ascend, and then they do their labs, through Extreme. And what's great about that is that when I do, either write or another author writes something that I'm using in my classes, it's very easy for them to go in and make those changes as needed, those customizations, and say, oh, you know what, something's changing in the market. We need to start emphasizing this area, and we need to take out that area. Or maybe there's an error in when you have a book that's hundreds of pages, it's really easy to have some errors in the books, and so they're able to go in and make those changes. But it's funny though, I've struggled where some of the I actually teach at 3 different colleges and as an adjunct, which is a great thing because I get to see 3 different cultures. And some of the times I've had arguments with my fellow professors where they said, well, we need to continue using physical books, and we need to continue having the students do their labs on their own computers. And then I explained to them how much better smaller it is, to how much more pliable, how much changeable, all these different things that we can do, stackable, if we choose this other option. So when I finally do get them to agree to a change, and then we see the students' responses afterwards, like, oh, I'm so glad I don't have to, just carry these books around, or I'm glad I don't have to struggle getting my own computer to work properly to get these labs done. Then we take that kind of feedback and we say, aha, we've got something new, we've got something better. Let's build on that. Let's continue, going down that road. And now it's becoming a little bit easier to, make those digital asset types of changes, as we move forward in technology. And I'm really pleased to see, that things are changing.
Thanks, Robert. Mark, David, I did want to, I know we're getting a little bit low on time here, but I did want you to maybe address that a little bit too at the high school level.
Okay.
David, I think you're on mute again. Might have just hit it twice. I think you're still on mute. Maybe you could hit that button one more time. All right. Okay. It looks like you're not on mute anymore, David. Can you hear us?
Okay. Yes, I can. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. It's really weird because I guess the lag, it says I'm on mute. So okay, anyways, I would back both, or what Robert and Mark are saying. The technology has been so grateful for as a teacher. Nowadays, everything is data driven. So all the AI we do, everything that we know is data driven. So with that, all the technologies has given us ample enough data to do what Mark is saying, is the recursion. So after so long, there's probably a prescribed time. Hey, at 7 days, you need to do it again. And then there's a lot of stuff. They take a different test that can categorize it. Okay, you did really well in this area. You don't need to touch on that area. You need to go on this area. And then as a teacher instructor, you can use the digital books to say, go read that part, go read this part. Exactly what Mark was saying. And I think that the issue is the technology is there, the software is there. I have seen it. I think it's just getting the schools to getting to use it. And my opinion with the 2-4 school districts or school counties or whatever you want to call it in whatever part of the country you are, they struggle to implement technology into their system. For instance, one of the ones that I was working with is very slow to adopt LMS, any LMS. I don't know why, but I've been working with their technology trying to implement that, but they don't have an LMS. And with that, there's lacking data. There's lacking of trying to do in tests. So for instance, if you do a test, you can see which area they're struggling in. So with that, I think that's more not so the technology and the software being there. Now it's just getting the schools to use it. And I don't know how to get schools to use it, and the getting schools and the software people to talk, because maybe that's what's happening, is that they're not talking. Because I know I had a hard time trying to find out curriculum for particular certifications and stuff like that to help me figure out where I want to begin. So that I think is this disconnect of there's all this technology out there, but how do we get the two, academia and the people, walk together in a most effective way?
Yeah, I think David's making a phenomenal point, which is very often the technology world is so far in front of the adoption of that technology. And certainly those of us who operate in technology and in around technology, we've already used it day in and day out in our lives. So we just don't understand why everyone else can't see it. But the reality is, very often it takes a very long time, even when it's part of human nature, right? It's our traditional practices. We get entrenched in those practices. And even when there's an innovative solution that solves a problem, it sometimes takes us a while to adopt it. And so before that becomes, very often it's an option, and then ultimately it'll become the new standard, but it takes a lot longer than anyone would think. David is spot on. It's spot on. So the sooner the better, but it just takes time because humans, are resistant to change.
All right. Thanks, David, and thank you, Mark, for your add-on there. So we only have time for one more question. So briefly, I'd really like to ask each of you to talk just a little bit about what is the future of academic learning, real briefly now. See, David, would you like to start?
Sure. So the future of academic learning, as I said, is more data driven, and will be all online, which if it is not all online already. And one of the things is the making sure the schools have the infrastructure. So one of the school districts or school counties I was in, we lost internet for a whole week, and we didn't get any teaching done because everything is all internet. So the whole school had no internet. So we were not doing much that week. But anyways, the future is definitely of academia with technology is so integrated. I think that as more school counties and districts get together, I think we will see a rapid explosion of making sure that students are learning faster and improving the technology and pushing the technology from college down to high school. So, I actually teach probably more of a college class, but it's in the high school, which is artificial intelligence and cloud computing. So really and truly, it probably should be a college class, but I'm actually teaching juniors and seniors in high school and trying to get them to prepare for, I guess, more advanced in college. So trying to figure that out because, again, that is advanced topic and it might even be a college topic. So.
Thank you, David. Mark, how about you? What is the future of academic learning?
The future of academic learning is you will learn what I have taught you, or I will shoot you with my laser beam. No, I mean, in all seriousness, there's no escaping the technology disruption. I can tell you what I hope. I hope that it's a hybrid. I go back to, the discussion we had today, that I think if we completely eliminate the human teaching element out of the academic experience, then, I think we lose something. I really do. Everybody can think of great teachers they've had in the past that they've learned from. And it's not just about the curriculum or the content. It's about that teacher and that teacher's connection. And I think if it all goes completely technology driven and oriented and everything's automated, then I think we lose that. So, but to David's point, we have to embrace the technology because I think it's important that there's a democratization of education. And what technology enables us to do is to deliver a quality education experience to more people in a consistent, standardized way. And so, I'm hoping for a hybrid. That it's some hybrid of the way the world used to be and the way the world's to become, right? And it's not that robot I just tried to poorly impersonate that's going to shoot you with a laser beam.
Thanks, Mark. How about you, Robert? We'll end on this note. What is the future of academic learning?
All right, here it is. Write this down. I believe we're only scratching the surface of what's to come in academic learning. And for online classes and maybe even on-campus classes, we're going to be given new challenges by performing complex lab simulations using 3D and augmented reality that may only typically be known in the physical world. Now, you may have seen some commercials for what's happening in the health industry and the health market, where you're seeing doctors learning using 3D and augmented reality. We're going to do the same thing with technology. We're going to be using that kind of technology to understand the inner workings of computers and software and hacking and viruses and things like that. And this is going to provide the experience that students need without ever physically touching a device.
Wow.
Robert, what a great answer. I've been taking notes. All right. Well, Robert, David, Mark, thank you so much, all three of you, for your time today. This has been a really interesting discussion for me. I've enjoyed it immensely, and I'm sure audience members have as well. So thank you once again.
Thanks, everyone.
Yes, thanks for having us.